All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for April's edition of Digging In with TPS-MTSU. We're really excited to have you join us today as we begin to dig in a little bit about the Founding Fathers. So a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. As always, for those of you joining us live, be sure to keep your mics muted unless you are participating in the conversation. Helps us keep a cleaner audio for those who are viewing the recording later on. If you're joining live, be sure that you've renamed yourself so we see your first and last name in the participant list. We love for these things to be interactive during the live session. So use the chat, go ahead and open that up, introduce yourselves, tell us where you're joining us from. Feel free to use the reaction buttons. And I know we're going to have at least one poll question today. So again, we hope that everyone who gets a chance to view these will have a chance at some point to join us live, because we do like for them to be as interactive as possible. And with this series, of course, we have a Padlet that is devoted just to this webinar series. And you can access here using the QR code or the web address. And you can actually find the newsletters, all of the different resources that we have shared within this series since its very beginnings back in 2020, all there on that one Padlet. So it's a great source, again, to go back and kind of, again, find things from this series. I'll reference this again as we get ready to close out, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our theme for this month. And I'm going to turn things over to Stacy to share that with us.
Thanks, Kira. I'm going to share my screen. Can you enable that, Kira? I'm getting a notice that I cannot. Sorry. Okay, now I can share my screen. So I'm going to open up the newsletter. Hopefully you all have had a chance to receive the email that had the link to this. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, then follow along. As you know, that on the first page, we always have a little blurb discussing the theme, and sometimes it has helpful links in it as well that may or may not be duplicated in other parts of the newsletter. So basically, we kind of questioned the whole phrase, where do we get the phrase Founding Fathers from? Who are the Founding Fathers? And so I turned to the Library of Congress for what they consider the Founding Fathers to be. And so they do have a research guide called American Founders, a Guide to Their Online Papers and Publications. And the Library of Congress, in order to define that, calls it the men who served in, or as diplomats for, the Continental Congresses, the Constitutional Convention, and the federal government of the United States until the close of the War of 1812. So that probably includes a lot of people, but in this particular research guide, they only have resources for 16 people, and 2 of those people were women. They were first ladies, Abigail Adams and Dolly Madison. So I'm just going to show you real quickly what this research guide looks like. So basically, because it's the Library of Congress, they have tons of collections of congressional papers for different periods, and especially the early American periods. So that's where we get a lot of our Library of Congress resources for this time period, is because of presidential papers and congressional papers. So you can see this lists not just collections that the library has, but also exterior, like from outside websites as well. So it's a really good bibliography if you're doing research into any of these people. So that's just probably going to be a little overwhelming for your students, but for you to have as an additional resource, it exists. So we just kind of are using the phrase Founding Fathers to mean those people who worked to create and or implement our founding documents. And so here we link to our founding documents links guide and our founding documents newsletter, which we did in February 2014. We also have a links guide and primary source set, which is linked to elsewhere. So like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So we're sticking with the obvious choices here, largely because we want to honor what you have to teach in your curriculum standards. And so that's why we cover James Madison, of course, father of our Constitution, Benjamin Franklin, whom we'll hear about more in just a minute, and George Washington. But also on page 4, we think about where the phrase founding fathers comes from. So if anybody knows where that phrase comes from, and I'm going to kind of scroll down so you can't see it, put it in the chat box. I'd be interested to know when you think that was first used as a phrase spoken by somebody who was prominent enough to have it recorded down in the newspapers. Any ideas? Are we getting any guesses?
Not seeing any guesses. I think people were trying to think about it. I mean, it was one that, I know stumped me. I was really surprised when I learned the answer to this.
Yes, Kira's the one who found this out for us. So I'm going to tell everybody by showing you what she put on page 4. Warren Harding, a 20th century president, is credited with maybe not coming up with the phrase, but definitely popularizing the phrase founding fathers, using it in a keynote address at the 1916 Republican National Convention. And before this, founding framers was the word that was more common to refer to the same body of people. So it's kind of interesting how that makes a difference in how you think about what they did, founding fathers versus framers. So that's just a question that you can use to start a discussion with your students. But we also expanded our idea of founding fathers just a bit more on page 4 by including a reference to Mercy Otis Warren, who of course was not a father at all, but one of the first American women to write for a public audience. And one of her faithful readers was Thomas Jefferson himself. And so she was very influential. And we linked to one of her works here. And we talk about, let's see, October, we'll come back to this one in a minute, I believe. But we also include Lafayette, America's favorite fighting Frenchman, and because he was so popular in the United States, he actually had a legacy here and not just in France. And so this little blurb talks more about him. And I'm going to return to what some of the links are on page 2 for further resources, plus our featured feature towards the end of our session today. But right now I'm going to turn it over to October so she can tell you more about Benjamin Franklin.
Hi, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I did my lesson plan this month on Benjamin Franklin and specifically his Albany Plan that he came up with in 1754. So just a little bit about who Benjamin Franklin is, although I'm sure we probably all know him. He was a founding father or a founding framer who was alive from 1706 to 1790. Besides just the political and revolutionary that he was also a printer of the Pennsylvania Gazette, making him a newspaperman. And he wrote the Poor Richard's Almanac. And he was the founder of the first Pennsylvania's fire department, which is interesting. He has a lot of community ties because he also created the first lending library in America, which was the Library Company of Philadelphia, and he helped start the University of Pennsylvania. And UPenn was actually one of the first 9 colleges of the 13 colonies. So a lot of community ties, a lot of political and revolutionary ties. For his lifetime, he did a lot in science, politics, community development. Which is probably why he's still remembered today. So the Albany Plan was one of the first plans created that focused on a united and central government for the 13 colonies. And it was presented in 1754, which was 27 years before the Constitution was ratified in 1781. So he was one of the very first people to think about what does it mean to create a central government, even being under English rule at the time. And the plan was accepted by all 13 of the colonies, but it was rejected by England because England didn't want to give up any of its power when it came to taxes, because the Albany Plan did propose that the 13 colonies have power over how they do taxes. And so England was like, we're not doing that. And one of the reasons that we went to war today. So yeah, was a problem even in 1754. And it heavily inspired the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, which is what I get into in my lesson plan. So my lesson plan has excerpts of the Albany Plan and of the Articles of Confederation to see how they are similar and different in terms of what the colonies were thinking about when it came to war, what they were thinking about when it came to representatives and how they were choosing their Congress, as well as state rights and state constitutions. So that's what my lesson plan dives into. I just wanted to quickly kind of give you an excerpt of an excerpt. So I shortened down the excerpt that is in the student packet, which I'll show you when I go back to the lesson, the newsletter at the end. But just to kind of give you an idea about what your students will be doing and then how you can do this comparing and contrasting in your classes. So we're going to be looking at how the Albany Plan and how the Articles of Confederation look at representatives. So starting with the Albany Plan, I'll read this out to you. So number 1, that the said general government be administered by a president general to be appointed and supported by the crown, and a grand council to be chosen by the representatives of the people of the several colonies met in their respective assemblies. Number 2, that within months after the passing of such act, the House of Representatives that happen to be sitting within that time, or that shall especially for that purpose convene, may and shall choose members for the Grand Council in the following proportion. That is to say, and then that proportion is there, that image on the right. So Massachusetts Bay got 7, New Hampshire got 2, Connecticut got 5, Rhode Island got 2, New York got 4, New Jersey got 3, Pennsylvania got 6, Maryland got 4, Virginia got 7, and North and South Carolina both got 4 to add up to 48 delegates in their Congress. And then number 4, that there shall be a new election of the members of the Grand Council every 3 years, and on the death or resignation of any member, his place should be supplied by a new choice at the next sitting of the Assembly of the colony he represented. And 6, that the Grand Council shall meet once in every year, and oftener if occasion require, at such time and place as they shall adjourn to the last preceding meeting, or as they shall be called to meet at by the President General on any emergency, he having first obtained in writing the consent of the 7 members to such call and sent duly and timely notice to the whole. So after all that legal jargon, what is the Albany Plan saying about representatives? If you guys want to put that in the chat or unmute yourself and talk, what's the Albany Plan outlining when it comes to representatives in their Congress? And I can't see the chat, so as responses come in, if Kira or Dr. Graham could read them out to me.
So it seems like you have an election every 3 years and they only meet once a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they only have to work 3 times.
Basically, yeah. Or, I mean, if there's a war to be declared, or the Albany Plan also makes a lot of specific things about trade with Native Americans, then they would meet again, but at minimum, they had to meet once a year.
Okay, and then I see that the president can make them meet more often if there is an emergency. Okay. And there's proportional representation, which is something, of course, that we'll be seeing later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. That's the Albany Plan, proportional representation, which they call the House of Representatives, which what we call our proportional representation today. And then that President General-elect being chosen by the Crown and meeting at least once a year. And they hold a term for every 3 years, and it's put to a vote. So then the Articles of Confederation, this is what it has to say about representation. So this starts at Article 5. For the more convenient management of the general interests of the United States, delegates shall be annually appointed in such manner as the legislature of each state shall direct, to meet in Congress on the first Monday in November in every year, with a power reserved to each state to recall its delegates or any of them at any time within the year, and to send others in their stead for the remainder of the year. No state shall be represented in Congress by less than 2, nor by more than 7 members, and no person shall be capable of being delegate for more than 3 years in any term of 6 years, nor shall any person being a delegate be capable of holding any office under the United States for which he or another for his benefit receives any salary, fees, or annulment of any kind. So then what is the Articles of Confederation saying about representatives?
Well, for starters, someone wrote right off the bat term limits.
Yes.
And I see that there's an emoluments clause, so no conflict of interest here.
Mhm.
Again, we're seeing the 3-year limits, although it's within the 6-year kind of time period. But it also seems to give the states a lot of power to pick whomever they want and change it around.
Yes, great. So then in my lesson idea, I give you guys a kind of graphic organizer that your students can use when looking through these 2 primary documents. So this is kind of an example of what it would look like on the graphic organizer. So like we said, for the Albany Plan of Union, there's a president-elect that's chosen by the Crown, whereas for the Articles of Confederation, there's no president-elect, and there's no stated way for a ruler or speaker to lead the Congress when they're in session. I actually had to look this up. For the Articles of Confederation, every year they just chose one of the delegates to lead the Congress as the speaker, and that's switched out every year, but it was never stated in the Articles of Confederation how that would happen because as we all know, the Articles of Confederation is purposefully weak because they didn't want a president or anyone who could be seen as a king. So that's an interesting comparison for your students to pick up on. For both, the representatives are proportional. For both, there's a new election every 3 years, but for the Albany Plan of Union, there's no stated term limit, whereas the Articles of Confederation has a 2-term limit, so they can't be represented for a max of 6 years, and representatives will meet at least once a year for both. So that's kind of how that compare and contrast will go. And again, there's also things, and I'll show you guys this. This is our website here, and the newsletter can be found on that left-hand side under newsletters, where all of our newsletters since 2009 are at, and we are in the April 2022 one. And I'll just show you, there's going to be a linked student packet, and that's where you'll find those excerpts of the Albany Plan and of the Articles of Confederation. So there's also included some excerpts about how each plan is handling war among the states and with any outside parties, and as well as state rights and state constitutions, since that's very important to the Articles of Confederation, and that graphic organizer is here. So they'll do the same thing for war and the same thing for state sovereignty. But yeah, just a couple of other things about Ben Franklin. I will go back to the newsletter and show you that I included something on the page 4. So this is an interesting letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote to George Washington a couple months before his death, about how excited he was that the Constitution was finally ratified and that George Washington became the first president of the United States. And so he wrote a letter to give to his son-in-law to take to Washington while he was feeling very ill, very close to his death, talking about how excited he was that he lived long enough to see this happen and to see the country kind of come to its conclusion to the way that he had imagined it, because Benjamin Franklin is one of the oldest politicians that was alive during our America's founding. And it's just really interesting to see how long he survived and how much he must have watched America change. So that's a really interesting letter to give to your students. There's a full transcript, not on the Library of Congress, but in Google Books. And I can put that link in the chat, but you can also find it just by Googling the date of the letter, which is September 16, 1789. So I think that's a cool letter to kind of show your students how long Ben Franklin was around and how his age might have helped him in seeing all that change and continuity in America. And we also, I'm trying to remember, we just did a partner program with ETHS and PBS on their Ben Franklin. Here it is. So they just came out, PBS just came out with the Benjamin Franklin documentary that we watched a couple of clips of in our watch party that we did for that. And I do believe That's not recorded, is it? Or is it?
No, the watch party is not recorded, but
Okay.
you can, of course, as what October is showing us, you can actually view the full episodes for the documentary through the PBS website.
Yes, and there are a couple clips that are really good at showing students, if you decide to give them an introductory to who Ben Franklin is, the first couple minutes do a really good job of that. So you don't have to watch the full 4 episode, 2 hours each episode long documentary with your students, but there are a couple clips that talk about who Ben Franklin is and how he became a revolutionary that are really good to highlight with your students if you decide to do this lesson plan or any other lesson plan on Ben Franklin. So that's it for me. Are there any questions?
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that, I know when we were doing the watch party, we had someone from the Knoxville area PBS station join us, and she was showing us, within their educational materials, they actually have lesson plans where they do the short clips from the video that are already, again, excerpted for kind of classroom use. So if that's something that you'd like to use, pulling in documentary clips, know that they do have that available for you. And again, they work so nicely with a lot of the resources that the Library of Congress has related to Franklin. So hopefully that will be something of use to you. And if you're into Ken Burns and his documentaries, then that is a great new excellent one that is out and available right now. So as I get ready to talk to you guys about James Madison, I have a question for you before I get into talking about him. So here is your question. Which of the following can be credited to James Madison? And I want you guys to mark all that apply. So he, 1, helped shape the Virginia Constitution. 2, was involved in the separation of church and state. He helped to ratify the Articles of Confederation. Was he governor of Virginia? Did he participate in the Constitutional Convention? Did he help create the Virginia Plan? And did he document the activities of the Constitutional Convention? Oh, wait, and there's still more choices. Did he write 1/3 of the Federalist Papers? And did he take the lead in the passage of the Bill of Rights? So I want you guys to mark all that apply. We'll see what we know about the scope of Madison's work. So as you guys are answering that, let me find where I want us to start. All right, give you guys just a couple more seconds to finish recording your thoughts on this question. Again, mark all that apply. All right, so let's see what you guys come up with. So we have 5 people who selected shaping the Virginia Constitution. Another popular answer was participating in the Constitutional Convention. Another one, creating the Virginia Plan. The Bill of Rights was a very popular choice. So the answer to this is all of them but one. The only thing that he didn't do on this list is he wasn't the governor of Virginia. He did everything else, and he actually held office in Virginia. He just wasn't the governor. So it's almost a little bit of a trick question. But I know in getting started in doing this research on Madison, I hear about him, father of the Constitution, know that he was a president, he has something to do with the Bill of Rights, and that's about what I knew about Madison going into it, because again, the founding period isn't my favorite area of study. So I was really interested as I started reading just how important he was to so many core things that we think about from the founding period. And so what we're looking at right now is actually one of the earliest images that we have of James Madison. And again, it's from that kind of period where the Constitutional Convention was happening. And I think, again, he also just looks really young. He's a real short, scrawny dude, which, again, I thought was pretty interesting. So you have that image that you can work with students. So Madison, again, he helps to get the Articles of Confederation ratified. Then he actually serves in the Continental Congress from 1780 to 1783. And while he's doing that, he's again as a representative from Virginia, he is noticing all of the problems with the Articles of Confederation and kind of, how it's not working quite as well as we probably would hope. So when he leaves office in 1783, being the very scholarly fellow that he was, he decides to embark on a research project. And as part of that research project, he writes this document that is of ancient and modern confederacies. And so essentially what he does is he sets out to research all of the noted government forms of kind of powerful empires in history and make note of kind of how their governments were structured, what worked, what didn't, as a starting point. So the library has this document that you can see here. You'll notice that it's 28 pages. And one thing that I think is particularly interesting that you'll note here on the left-hand side, this is kind of the image with this is the transcript. So you'll see there's this note that essentially this ends on page 39. And basically he didn't finish it. Like he still was still working on this and kind of, I guess, got distracted with some other things. But you'll see that he actually had noted the Grayson Confederacy. That was kind of his next starting point as he was writing, kind of adding to this document. You can, of course, flip through this and look at this with your students, and again, kind of read through the different things that are here. And again, there is a transcript available. I will also show you guys in a minute. I found another site that the National Archives does that also provides transcripts, and sometimes depending on format, I like to look at both of them to see which one format I thought might work a little better with students. You can also, of course, access the PDF file, which is a transcript of this here as well. So again, that was his research document. So then he takes, again, the research that he's been doing, and then he's had that experience in the Continental Congress, and he starts outlining all of the problems that he sees that need to be addressed with the government. And the document that he creates for that is called Vices of the Political System of the United States. And again, we see the document that the Library of Congress has in its collection. And you'll note here, there's two columns almost. So you've got like this left-handed column here, which is like the big themes. And then beside that on the right-hand column is basically he's detailing what the problems are. And again, we see that here, but this is one where I really like how this website right here, which again, this is a National Archive site, Founders Online, how they have the transcript available here on their site. I think it might be a little easier for students if you use this version. So you'll see here again, that left-hand side. So a couple of things that he's pointing out, again, problems with the Articles of Confederation. One, failure of the states to comply with the constitutional requisitions. And again, here's just evidence. Encroachments by the state on the federal authority. Violations of the laws of nations and treaties. Trespasses of the states on the rights of each other. And again, we see that evidence there. And so, you could work this out with students and really have them kind of start with that left-hand side. Again, what are these big issues that he's talking about? And again, you could have them maybe divide them up and have them look at some of the, the evidence that he's showing, the examples for each one of these kind of themes. And again, think about why would this be a problem for a new emerging nation to have, as they're trying to figure out how to make things work, how are these issues going to be problematic for them long term? So again, he's created this document kind of outlining our problems as he sees them. So then he begins to work on, again, what are the solutions to these problems? And so kind of behind the scenes, prior to the Constitutional Convention, he begins working on what becomes the Virginia Plan. And so he actually sends George Washington this letter on April 16, 1787, basically outlining all of his ideas for what the new form of government should look like. And again, this is one, the library has the actual letter. And so you can look at it through the library's website. But as you can see, it's a little difficult to read. And this, unfortunately, is one of those where the library doesn't have a transcript available. But again, this is also one where that Founders Online, you actually can find the transcript of this. And so here is the transcript of that letter. And I'm going to read you guys just a couple of passages from this. And I want you to think about what basically, what elements, what is he talking about here that we see present in our government today? So the first one I'm going to read is this paragraph 3 right here. And he tells Washington, conceiving that an individual independence of the states is utterly irreconcilable with their aggregate sovereignty, and a consolidation of the whole into one simple republic would be as inexpedient as it is unattainable. I have sought for some middle ground, which may at once support a due supremacy of the national authority and not exclude the local authorities wherever they can be subordinately useful. So what is he saying there? And again, in the chat, and what is he saying?
Well, he's saying that you can't have states' rights and federal government.
Right. So yeah, so we've basically got to find some balance, right? Some balance of power between the states having some power, because they're not, essentially he's also saying that the states aren't going to give up all their power. They're not going to give up their identity to be one. But how do we also then find, have a federal national authority? Like, how do we find, again, that middle ground?
Yeah, it does look like he's promoting federalism.
Yeah.
He's on that side.
Yeah. So that's the first one. So then we're going to look at paragraph 5. So I would propose next that in addition to the present federal powers, the national government should be armed with positive and complete authority in all cases which requires uniformity, such as the regulation of trade, including the rights of taxing both exports and imports, the fixing of terms, and the forms of naturalization, etc. So what are we talking about here?
Well, it seems like he's pointing out things that should be the powers of the federal government. So strengthening those powers, sharing the powers, and being very specific about what they're going to cover.
Right. And, you could actually bring in, of course, the conversation, the earlier issues that had happened when, certain states wanted to put, taxes on certain exports, and we're really kind of creating a mess as far as like bringing in goods from other states as well as from other countries. And so that, is a little bit of context for what is happening there. All right. And then the last one. Here, we're going to look at this one right here. The national supremacy ought also to be extended, as I conceive, to the judiciary departments, if those who are to expound and apply the laws are connected by their interest and their oaths with the particular states wholly, and not with the union. The participation of the union in the making of the laws may be possibly rendered unavailing. It seems at least necessary that the oaths of the judges should include a fidelity to the general as well as the local constitution, and that an appeal should lie to some national tribunals in all cases to which foreigners or inhabitants of other states may be parties. The admiralty jurisdiction seems to fall entirely within the purview of the national government. So what are we talking about here?
He's saying that certain forms of justice have to be handled by the federal government, establishing some sort of Supreme Court powers, because that's the only way to be consistent.
Right. And it's also important to have basically an independent judiciary that does that.
Yeah.
So, you could pull out many more examples. That's just 3. This letter, as you can see, is a little lengthy. So you would definitely want to excerpt this for your students, depending on your grade level. But you definitely could go through and pull out in what are some things that he's presenting to Washington that then find their way into the Constitution, and that we know, of course, as part of our mode of government today. So what is really interesting, Sorry, things blocking. So what's interesting within all that is he basically presents this to Washington and to the governor of Virginia, and then they take that plan to the Constitutional Convention. Again, that's what becomes the Virginia Plan, and he advocates for a lot of this that then again finds its way into the Constitution, which is one reason that again we think of him as the father of the Constitution. It's also interesting. I was watching some videos earlier today that he wasn't initially at the Constitutional Convention that supportive of a Bill of Rights. And of course, we know later on, he's the one who actually ensures that we have a Bill of Rights. And so that's another little interesting point that you could bring up with your students. There is a great Today in History article that is linked in the newsletter idea for him. Again, you can find a lot of different links here that are available. So that again, just a little bit about James Madison, a really interesting one. And this, of course, doesn't even begin to get into what he did as president, where he has a role in the Louisiana Purchase. He's president during the War of 1812. I mean, he really is amazing, just again, how influential Madison is. So hopefully this piques your interest a little bit, and you guys can dig a little bit more into his story.
All right. I am going to share some of the resources that are in the rest of the newsletter. And please feel free to ask questions and make comments and stuff in the chat box as we have been doing. Okay, so can everyone see my screen now? So the third lesson idea that I'm not going to get really far into, but I just want to show you kind of a quick overview, is looking at George Washington's farewell address, which is a very important primary source that's named pretty specifically in the standards. So, and I, of course, have heard of this address quite often, and I knew it was famous, but I'd never read it myself. And I was thinking, oh, this will just be something short that I can throw into a worksheet. No, this is a 7,641 word address, which when I copied and pasted it into a Word document came out to 16 pages. And if you actually, if you go to the link that's there, they talk about it in the Senate's website, how there's a tradition where once a year, somebody reads aloud from beginning to end the entirety of George Washington's farewell address, and how it usually takes about 45 minutes to get through the whole thing. Although somebody sped up and went through it in like 39 minutes. Apparently that's the fastest that you can read it. So you definitely don't want to read the entirety of this letter in class with your 8th grade students. So, but then it was filled with so many good things that I didn't want to pick just one excerpt. So this lesson idea actually divides it into 7 different excerpts. So there, if you click on the 7 excerpts link, it's 7 pages, and each page has kind of a chunk that's kind of thematically a bit unified. So that way you can divide your students up and have them read just like one bit instead of the whole thing, and then they can discuss it as a whole. Now, one note that I wanted to make about some of the resources when you're using these on the Library of Congress, and this brings up something that Kira had showed you, how sometimes the Library of Congress will give you, like for instance, for this, you can see the manuscript, but then they also will give you the transcription, which is nice and helpful. You can copy and paste it from the HTML available here, or you can download a PDF. But you may have noticed this. I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but I have noticed this before when trying to make worksheets out of this, that sometimes when you do that, they have footnotes in these. And so when you copy and paste this, it includes all the footnotes, and that can be confusing when you're trying to sort through what is the actual primary source and what are footnotes that a librarian put in. These footnotes are talking about kind of how Washington went to the newspaper editor and said, I want you to print this, because this wasn't a speech that he gave. This was a speech that he gave in written form to a newspaper editor, and then it was published in a newspaper. So he didn't read it aloud. So this is why I include a link, not from the National Archives, like what Kira had, but from the Yale Avalon Project website. That is just really, it has so many wonderful primary source texts that are very easy to just copy and paste from if you're looking for something that you can manipulate into a handout without all the other little kind of things that you have to edit out yourself. So I just wanted to make a note of that for when you're looking through some of these resources. Make sure that when you're copying and pasting off of transcriptions, you're not getting all these extra things that make the primary source text kind of confused. Okay, and of course, this farewell address was actually originally written for him by James Madison. So there we go again, James Madison doing everything at the end of Washington's first term. But then he was like, okay, I'm going to do a second term. So put that on hold. And so at the end of his second term, when he decides that he's not going to run again, he gets that and he gives it to Hamilton. And he's like, okay, let's rework this. And then he puts his final touches on it. So it very much has what he wants in it, but a lot of the verbiage itself comes from Hamilton and Madison, which is not surprising because they were such prolific authors themselves. You know, it's where we get most of the Federalist Papers, as you know. Okay, now one of the links in this I want to show you where it says one of the most important presidential addresses. This is a link to a resource guide just on this one primary source. So they do pick out certain very important primary documents and they give you an entire resource guide just on that. And so I know that Kira had mentioned in the chat box earlier how useful these things are. And so here you go. Here's where you can look at different links and kind of where they are located, where it talks more about it, etc. And so yeah, that's what we have here for this. And we're going to come back to the song at the end of today's session. Because some of you might recognize some of the words from Washington's farewell address, if you're like me, from a particular song from the musical Hamilton, because of course, when Washington is retiring, that's a whole important kind of set piece song. So we're going to come to that later. Okay, so some of the other resources that I wanted to point out, we have a new close reading exercise, which if you're not familiar with those particular resources, I'm going to show you on our website where you can find them. So under Tools for Educators, we have a tab for close reading exercises. And so if you haven't seen these, it's where we take a well-known text that connects very clearly to something in your standards. And we boil it down to a workable reading length. And then we annotate that with all sorts of additional resources and explanations and vocabulary and context so that students can get more out of it in terms of meaning. So all of these are close reading exercises. And so they're in chronological order. So this one is located here, a wall of separation between church and state, which is a very famous phrase. And this explores where that comes from and the context, because we have an idea about what separation of church and state means nowadays in the 21st century that has evolved as so many things in our country have over the past 200 and some odd years. So this is looking at the context in which Jefferson wrote it and what he might have meant by it at the time. And so what surprised me was that Thomas Jefferson, excuse me, that Thomas Jefferson actually was not against using government public buildings for religious services, because he actually oversaw where he actually allowed a lot of church services to take place in the US Capitol and in the White House. And he attended a bunch of those services himself. What he was against was the preference of any particular religion or denomination over another, or also the making any kind of religious observance of any kind mandatory. And so from the poll, you'll remember that James Madison was involved in determining what separation of church and state would look like in the United States. So yes, he actually is in one of these context clues down here, where we're talking about, where he's talking about natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties, because James Madison was thinking of this in terms of rights of conscience. So each person has a right of conscience, and he adds this language to the Virginia Declaration of Rights in 1776, which becomes the basis for the Bill of Rights. And he also talks about it in Federalist Paper number 51. And so, of course, he and Thomas Jefferson were political bros. And so, Jefferson was very much of this thought of right of conscience as well, influenced by Madison. And so that's one reason why that wording is in here. But the cool thing about this is not just that, here's where it actually comes from, wall of separation between church and state. So there's the origin of that particular phrase. But this, the manuscript, as you can see, as you may have seen, like Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence, he crosses stuff out, he reworks it. He actually ran it by a couple cabinet members who were from the Northeast. And he's like, is this going to play well with the people in the Northeast? Because they were largely a Federalist stronghold. And he, as a Democratic Republican, was trying to not anger them and appeal to them without also offending his own political base. And so the FBI helped the Library of Congress reconstruct through their specific imaging technology what the words were that were crossed out. And one thing was that he originally wrote wall of eternal separation between church and state. So if that makes a difference in what that might mean, then you can discuss that with your students. That's something that comes up in the for further thought box down below. But I have to say that my favorite, I'm going to be silly for just a minute, if you'll allow me, but my favorite part of this is when reading further into the context of this, it does have to do with the Danbury Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut. And Connecticut, of course, is being part of Great Britain, was in largely Federalist stronghold territory. And so there weren't as many Democratic, Republican leaning people up there. And the Baptists were actually the minority denomination in a largely Congregationalist area. And so they supported Thomas Jefferson for president very wholeheartedly. And so when he was elected, they were very grateful for his representation of them, and they wanted to show their support of him. And also they wanted to be like, you're welcome, because we gave you our support in an area that you didn't normally have a foothold. And so one of them, John Leland, came to the Capitol to preach shortly after this letter was written. And when he did, he brought Jefferson a special gift, a 1,235-pound cheese wheel. And if you want to read more about that, you can click on this link, because it's the Cheshire Mammoth cheese, and it was only made with milk from no Federalist cows were involved. So it's just a really interesting story that adds to this whole context of this political rivalry between Federalists and Democratic Republicans at this time. And then, of course, Jefferson trying to fend off accusations that he was an atheist because he loved the French so much, when he really was just trying to make sure that the US didn't have the kind of monarchy in Great Britain where the head of state was also the head of the church. So all those things your students might not realize because of a lot of modern issues surrounding this because of Supreme Court decisions. And so looking at the original context might be a little bit refreshing. So that's what this is. And going back to the newsletter, you can see that there's a bit of a write-up about that and a link to Religion and the Founding of the American Republic, which is a digital exhibition at the Library of Congress that has a lot of good material on this time period. So looking at the important links box, here's that founding documents, primary source set and links guide that I mentioned at the beginning of our session today. This is quite old, but it still has a lot of good stuff in it. So founding fathers, of course, being the ones who framed the founding documents. And so if you're looking for where can I get the Declaration of Independence? Well, you can get several different versions of it. So this not only links you to them, it also it tells you which specific versions that you're getting. And then of course, there's a lot of resources at the Library of Congress to support this, whether little articles from America's Story or exhibitions or essays, and some lesson plans that they have looking at the drafts. And then of course, the Articles of Confederation, which we learned about a little bit earlier today. So here's some resources there. And we're gonna, if you come across broken links, because the library changes this website every other day, just let us know. We are going to hopefully be launching an initiative to fix some of these over the coming year, but it takes time. Constitution and supporting resources for teaching that, and all sorts of related things. And so that was from the very first link. And then again, because so many of these people have left manuscript paper collections that are now a part of the library's collections, we link to those, to some of those. And but the best way to find information on these people, again, the resource guides. So we have a little short list here of all the different resource guides that the Library of Congress has for the founding fathers. So I recommend going there first if you're looking for resources for teaching these people. And then there are a couple exhibitions that are on here, including the Ben Franklin in His Own Words exhibition from the library, as well as the Framing of the Creating the United States. And within Creating the United States, they have subsections for creating the Declaration, creating the Constitution, and creating the Bill of Rights. And those are really telling the whole story of this time period that we're just kind of going over very quickly right now. And then we have a link to an outside source, the American Revolution Institute. So I am going to, unless there are any questions in the chat, I'm going to turn this back over to Kira as soon as I stop sharing.
Thank you, Stacy. So hopefully we've given you guys some new information, maybe some things you didn't know about the founding fathers, and some great resources that you can use with your students. So as we wrap up, again, just a reminder, the Padlet, you can find all the information there on that Padlet. And as always, if you are interested in receiving PD credit for today, you will need to complete a short survey. You can access that either using the QR code that's there. So you can just hold up your phone, get that, and it will take you directly to the Google form. For those of you joining us live, we'll drop the link for that in the chat box and you can access it that way. I check those about once a week. And so try to get the survey, your certificates out to you at least once a week. So again, if it takes longer than that, touch base with me, let me know, make sure that we haven't had some kind of technical error and me getting your feedback on that. A couple of other things. So this will be our last digging in for just a little bit. We will not be doing this webinar series for the summer. And because of scheduling conflicts, we're not going to be able to do one next month. So we will resume this series probably in August. So definitely keep check for the newsletter. We'll have information about when our next digging in will take place as we get closer to the end of summer. But we are going to be offering a number of other PD opportunities for the summer. And so let me, hold on just a second. So let me pull up the list real quick and I can show you what those are. So you can find those on our upcoming workshops list on the website. which of course is mtsu.edu/TPS. So you will find that we have 3 that are currently up and the registration is available and open for. The first one, we are partnering with the East Tennessee Historical Society, June 21st to the 24th, meeting in Cleveland, Tennessee, focusing on the Trail of Tears. And so we're going to be visiting a lot of sites related to the Cherokee Trail of Tears story in Southeast Tennessee and Northeast Georgia. That one, with the funding that we have, we're actually able to cover lodging for teachers. It is a residential institute, so you're expected to stay with the group for the entirety of those days. So again, you can find information about that on the website. And if you're interested in registering for that, you can contact Lisa Oakley at the East Tennessee Historical Society to register. There are a limited number of seats. So again, if you're interested and want to join, I would encourage you to register as soon as possible. We are also going to be doing 2 conferences in July. The first one is in Atlanta, July 7th and 8th, and it is kind of the culmination of our long-running Civil Rights Fellowship program that we're doing with the University of South Carolina and Mars Hill University. With that conference, we will have keynote Charles Payne. We have an arts a program that will be happening with Alliance Theater from the Atlanta area, a number of different concurrent sessions, and visiting 3 different historic sites in the Atlanta area. All of that is covered with your registration fee, which is $75, along with meals. So again, it's a really good value for the conference. So again, the registration for that is open, and we would encourage you to take a look at that. And then here in Tennessee, July 15th and 16th in Nashville, we have the Discover Tennessee History Conference, Perspectives on Tennessee History. Again, a 2-day conference, keynote. We've got a panel that's going to happen on Saturday morning. We've got some optional tours available. There is a small registration fee for that one that I believe is $30. I think that's right. Hold on. Let's see if yes, $30. I was right. And so you can see here, you can access the agenda, information about the concurrent sessions, and registration all through the link on our webpage. So again, if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to go ahead and register. Spots are limited for that conference as well, just due to capacity issues. So again, hopefully you guys will join us for that. We'll be announcing a couple of other summer things with our May newsletter, but hope to see you guys at some of our in-person events. We're really excited to actually get out and be doing some in-person stuff this summer, in addition to the virtual stuff that we will continue as we get into next school year. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and I can't wait to see you guys again. So thanks.